And I love being an engineer. It's Sherlock Holmes and being a writer at the same time. It's like doing stuff with your hands and creating stuff and seeing it work.
Gil Tayar, thank you for joining me. How are you? Good morning.
Good. Very happy to be here.
I'm very, very happy that you're here. We've known each other for quite some time. You've been a very important part of my personal journey, both as a mentor mentor and judge throughout the different hackathons that I organized. But more importantly, you've introduced me to the whole world of developer relations and advocacy for great engineering and great coding, and I've gained a lot of inspiration seeing how much you enjoy the work that you're doing. And I speak to a lot of people, and I know a lot of engineers. I don't think I've yet to meet somebody who's as excited and enjoys their work as much as you enjoy it.
Thank you.
So it's really heartwarming. Also, thank you for sharing that passion. And I'd love to focus these 20 minutes both on that passion, but more importantly on the world of engineering and knowledge sharing. Now, just for context, I know that there's thought leaders in a lot of industries, right? There's thought leaders in philosophy, thought leaders in economics, but you've introduced me to the world that there's thought leaders also in engineering and in good coding habits, good engineering styles, and that's what I'd love to allude to later on. But first, Gil, take me back. Who are you, and how do you become an engineer yourself?
Ah, First of all, I'm like I think the first wave of developers that wanted to be developers in Israel and probably in the world. Uh, I started at the age of 13, and we're talking 84, 83. So it was the dawn of the PCs. There weren't any PCs basically before that. It was all mainframes and mini computers. At the age of 13, I got a ZX81 for the bar mitzvah.
I'm not even gonna
It was
pretend that I know what it is.
it's like this little computer with chiclet keyboard, and it had 1K of RAM, not 1 megabyte, not 1 gigabyte, not 1K. And you could write little basic programs, and you connected it to your TV. Okay, there weren't any monitors then, and you stored your programs on a tape recorder. That's the way it was. And I learned BASIC, and I loved it, and I upgraded to 16K RAM and everything, uh, and decided this is what I want to do. For the rest of my life. I got an Apple II afterwards. Blah blah blah. Anyway, long story short, I ended up in Mamram, which is the computer. It was the big computer unit in the Israeli Defense Force. It still is.
Mhm.
Very similar to 8200, 8200, and back then much more known.
Right.
I did the whole training, 9 months of computer programming
Wow.
course, and they wanted, and this is part of the DevRel journey, in a sense, it's the start of it, and they wanted me to stay as a trainer for computers, for the soldiers. And I said yes. And just understand, I was like this shy, not very talkative person. But what I found out was that once I go up on a stage, I transform. I transform into this, like, sorry for that, a charismatic, talkative, funny, and everything speaker. And when I go back down out of the stage, I go back to being shy
Fascinating.
and not
Why
it was
is that?
fascinating. Obviously, slowly, when I went back out of stage, I continued being that talkative and funny and
That's the
entertaining
Gil that I
person.
know. Right.
Exactly. So, in a way, that was the start of changing myself and being more confident with myself. And Devrel, and talking in front of an audience, if you can do it, gives you that. It gives you that confidence because you go and you speak, and people look at you, and they clap, and it's an immense. It gives you a lot of confidence, a lot of confidence.
100%,
um,
100%. But so you start off. So your dev relations journey starts off back in Mamram when you're going and you're teaching and you're training the next cohort of engineers in the army. And but you continue
yep.
doing that throughout your entire career, right? Until today, you still go to many conferences every year. You go on stages. Now you do it over Zoom, obviously. But besides that, you still chose to be a proper engineer, a senior architect, right? In various startups and companies. So why? So first of all, let's focus on that. Why be a senior architect? What is it about being an engineer that excites you? That you said, okay, I want to continue being an engineer, because a lot of people that I know at some point they said, yeah, I had fun being an engineer. Now I want to start managing teams and I want to go into the more managerial scene. But you decided that you're still want to be hands on and be an active part of the engineering part of the company, right?
Yes. There's this tension. Once you get good enough, the company wants you to, go up the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And back then there was only one ladder. You become a team leader, and then a director, and then a VP R&D, and well, that's it.
Right.
Um, uh, and I tried that, and I find that I didn't like managing people. I didn't like Back then, I didn't like being the one responsible for what they were writing.
Right.
Um, you know, and I decided, okay, everybody wants me to be, whatever, but that's not what I want. I want to code. I'm a farmer. I'm not a, I want to till the soil. I want to, smell the leaves, and figure out what's right for them. And that is what I want, and that is what I wanted. And obviously, being a good engineer, I kept being pulled up, and my career was like a seesaw. It was like being pulled up to managerial position, and then saying, "Oh no, I don't want that." Being pulled up. After a while, I understood that fuck it, I'm not gonna do that anymore. And whenever people said, "You want to be a team leader?" I said, just no. I learned to say no, and I love being an engineer. It's Sherlock Holmes and being a writer at the same time. It's like doing stuff with your hands, and creating stuff and seeing it work, and not managing the people that do that. And I'm not disparaging. I mean, we need both kinds of people.
Sure.
We need managers, we need software developers. But you can have a career that, you can have a career that goes the managerial way, that forks to managerial. But today, it's called an individual contributor, I think. You can have a career that goes up the, more professional, technical ladder, and the salaries are almost like 10%, almost as high. So don't worry about your salary. It will be high, especially if you're good. I mean, a good software engineer, a great software engineer, is worth their weight in gold. So
100%.
if you want to do that, please continue doing.
100%. And just for that, it caught me by surprise as I was going through my own journey within the army in 8200. One of the things that was very interesting for us as soldiers was that people that are professional and they're staying in the army, let's say for 5 6 years, they're still engineers, they're still hands on. They make more money than somebody who's an officer and who's leading a team of people. And it was a big dissonance, because especially in the army, where you're in a lot of places your rank identifies your credibility and sort of your paycheck. Here you have a unit that is one of the leading units in the IDF and probably in the world in terms of engineering, and it says, whoa, just FYI, if you're professional and you're really really good, you're going to make even more than the managers, which is very unorthodox, and it's very interesting. And I'd love to hear your take, because a lot of the people that are watching this are not engineers. And I'm a huge advocate for studying computer science. I'm now studying it hands on, and while I may not be the most passionate guy in the room about computer science, I am deeply passionate about problem solving and the ability to problem solve using the skills that we're gaining. So I'd love to hear from you what is so attractive to you about engineering, and perhaps maybe demystify some of the scary notions behind what you might be doing on a day-to-day basis.
There are two kinds of developers. That's how I think about it. The developers that think that software development is an engineering, and the people that think that software development is a craft. You can immediately spot them. The engineers think that we can get to perfect. They love type systems, because they believe that if you get the types right, everything will fall into place.
Right.
And then there are the craftsmen. They understand that nothing's perfect, and software development is like it's like it's like voting in the U.S. You can never reach 100% for some reason. It's always like a tangent to perfect, and you can strive to that, but it's never that, and you always have to mangle it and fix it and deal with practical problems. I'm a craftsman. Uh, and as a craftsman, I love to create. I don't see myself as really different from a carpenter or from what do you call it, somebody who makes dresses and stuff like that. That I create using my tools, which is like the ID and the keyboard and the mouse. But what I create is as creative as other craftsmen, like carpenters and whatnot. That is how I see it. Definitely, there's an engineering part of it. I'm not saying no, but the way I see it as craftsman, and as a craftsman, almost an artsman, almost an artist, that is the passion I bring to my work, craft.
Right. And I think that that is a great leeway to the notion of being of developer relations and sharing your craft and sharing your passion. Because when you explain to me that you're going up on stage and you're bubbly and charismatic, you're talking about code. You're not talking about philosophy or economics or politics. You're talking about JavaScript, often code behind you, and being charismatic about it. And that is something that I think is going to be interesting for a lot of people to hear, because it's very counterintuitive. Because up until now, you think of an engineer, you think of somebody who is a coder, they're sitting down in their own silo, and they're not really human to human. Yet you're here and you're breaking that paradigm. And I encourage anybody to go and look up Gil Tayar on YouTube, because you did many of these talks. First of all, what is developer relations, and then how does that fit into this idea that there are thought leaders in the engineering world?
So developer relations used to be called evangelism, and then it became developer relations, and now it's developer advocacy.
Right.
But it's basically a lot of things in one. One is if I'm a company, if I'm at Applitools right now, and we do developer tools. So if we do developer tools, we need to market to developers. And who's the best person to market to developers? Well, other developers like myself. So one thing I do is we're dealing with visual testing. So I talk about testing in general and visual testing in conferences, and thus introduce people to Applitools, not as a marketing. I don't say a lot of Applitools. I made demo with Applitools, but that's about it. But as okay, there's this thing called visual testing. Let's try it out, and let's try it out with Applitools. That's one thing. Another thing is branding of the company. I mean, Wix has used it in Israel very nicely.
Right.
That is how I started the developer advocacy. They don't care about developers in terms of developer tools, but they want the best developers in Israel to come to Wix. And one of the best ways to do that is to create a brand of Wix engineering, so that developers will want to come to Wix because they hear me speak, or other developers speak at Wix. So that's the other side of developer advocacy, which is great for other companies. And the third is we're a community. Um, there's no thing about, I mean, especially open source. It's like everything's free, everything's community driven, and giving back to the community is part of what I do by educating, by showing what I've learned, and talking and all that stuff.
100%.
So those for me are the three facets of developer advocacy, and I love the three of them.
How do ideas spread in the developer world? So in economics, it would be, and physics, it would be through scientific papers. Politics, it would be through news. How do ideas spread in the world of coding? Because oftentimes the things that I see that you're talking about, let's say visual testing or why you should write tests for your CSS. I mean, those are things that are not necessarily mainstream for a lot of organizations. And yet you're coming and you're suggesting a paradigm shift or a break in conception that is not that easy. So how do these new ideas become mainstream in our world?
Just like memes, it's a struggle between ideas out there, and the best idea wins in a way, or like the most influential people that bring the best ideas, they win. And in essence, and credit is a lot about you, not just about the ideas you bring to the table. Um, Credentials is going out there and telling what you're doing. It doesn't matter if it's like new visual, like visual testing, or if it's like regular stuff, like when I talk about ES modules in Node.js. Uh, Go out, talk, have people see you, do a lot of Twitter. Don't do Facebook. Twitter is where the thought leaders are. Um, do and start small. Don't try go to JSConf right immediately, which is like this huge conference. Start with local meetups. Gain the confidence there, gain the people there, and then start going up the ladder to more international Israeli conferences and then international conferences, etc., etc. Credibility it takes time. For
Takes
me, it's
time.
like 6, 7 years. So it takes time. Start small, slowly grow up. Talk about what you know. It doesn't really matter. You wouldn't believe how much people are thirsty for information. Talk about
100%.
what you know. It'll be great.
100%. Now, your title is senior architect, and obviously
Yes.
that's not a building architect. It's a different type of architecture. How is that different from being an engineer or a coder? What is an architect in essence?
My sarcastic answer to that is an architect is a coder who's too old to be called a coder. Um, but seriously, it's not just that. Once you reach a certain level of system, like of product, where you have more code, and it's not just one server, one Postgres, one database, and REST API or whatever. Once you need a system comprised of microservices and message passing and everything, you need somebody to figure out what those building blocks of that product is, and that's what a software architect does, basically. I hate software. I call them architecture astronauts. I hate software architects that just build, the architecture and then throw it to developers to code. That is totally wrong. I build the architecture along with other people, and then I just plunge in and write it as we go along, understanding the problems with my design as I go along, and changing it to fit whatever is needed.
100%. So for those listening that are deeply passionate about engineering and they see themselves as craftsmen, just like you see yourself, and they're excited about about being that Sherlock Holmes, that you're both solving the issue, but you're also a novel writer. I love that analogy. And what tips can you give from your experience as they're going on their journey over the years to become better and more skillful?
Um, Two things, at least, that come to mind. One, understand the technology you're working in a deep sense. So if you're using promises, please understand promises correctly. If you're using, I don't know, functional programming, try understand what functional programming is about. If you're using Kubernetes or Docker, how does Docker work? Okay. Theoretically, you don't need that information, but practically in the real world you do sometimes, and the deeper your understanding is, the more people will come to you for advice, and you can figure out the weird problems. skills. So that's one, deep understanding of whatever you're doing. The second thing is over communicate. I don't say communicate. I used to say communicate, but people, when over communicate, say more than you think that should be said. It's like when you're acting, when you're smiling, you're supposed to smile much more than regular. So when you're communicating, do more than what you think you should be, and then you get to the right level of communication.
Okay, we problem solved. Gil, why over communicate and not communicate?
Because people tend to under communicate. So when you say to people over communicate, they give the right amount of communication. Also, when you're explaining something, when you're talking about what you're doing, the other side doesn't really understand the context. So you have to explain and re-explain and re-explain the context. And that context, along with your explanation, that's how you get over it. And communication is crazy important. If you don't communicate, then people won't know how good you are. People won't know, and vice versa. And I feel a lot when I over communicate, when I like write, and then I say, hey, wait, that's wrong, and then go back to my software and fix it. A lot of times when I explain something to somebody, I figure out things myself. So talk, write as much as possible.
Gil, I think that's such a great insight, because I think at the end what you're saying about context is crucial. We sometimes think for hours about a problem, and we come up with our resolution, right? And it could be 3 bullet resolution of what we think should happen, and we only provide the outcome, but we sometimes neglect to provide the whole thinking process, which explains the rationale behind the solution. And even if the other person understands it, they might not accept it, or they might not even understand our solution without the context of the thinking process. So that's definitely one of the most important lessons that I'm taking with me from this. Gil, I want to thank you for both the inspiration, these 20 minutes, but overall, I think it's been maybe 7 years since we've been in contact. So thank you for that, and thank you for helping so many youth around Israel and the world through hackathons, through your journey. And obviously the countless people that are watching your lectures and your presentations on YouTube and live. But before we leave, I have to ask you for 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Fast, communicative, and it didn't really come out this time, but funny. Lots of memes.
I can definitely testify for that. Gil, thank you very much. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.